Hello, everybody. This is a pretty serious conversation I'm going to have today. When I attended school in the 1950s, it was a short time after the Second World War, and the United States was in the midst of a Cold War. I have a really strong memory of these periodic shelter drills that we had when we would have to scrunch under our desks until the alarm rang to let us know that the drill was over. At the time, I remember that it seemed like a strange, slightly scary play activity. Didn't seem very real to me. When I began teaching in 1968, we had similar drills where we would take the children into the hallway, warn them to be silent, and tell them to sit down on the floor. The waste of time and the possibility for frightening children unnecessarily annoyed me greatly. Now, unfortunately, there's a harsh reality to shelter drills. They are truly necessary and more tied to reality than they ever should be. It's not the bomb that threatens school children. It's a threat from within our own society. It's the reality of someone entering a school building, carrying rifles and assault weapons. How does this threat affect teachers and school children and parents? I invited my friend, Doug Hecklinger, a very dedicated and thoughtful fourth grade teacher at a New York City public school, to come and speak with us. And I'm pleased that he accepted my invitation to share his thoughts with you. One thing I was thinking about, well, first of all, hi, Doug. How are you?
Okay.
When in my book, and when I speak with teachers, I really emphasize that a classroom has a voice. When somebody walks into a classroom, the classroom speaks to them. And it's really up to the teacher to think about what voice their classroom will have. Could you speak to that a little bit about your own classroom and about the culture that you've set up in your room?
Sure. Oops, sorry. Yeah, and I should have looked up who said this quote. Maybe your followers will know it even now, or maybe you will. I can't remember who said it, but it was somebody talking about education. And the quote is something like, I came to the frightening conclusion that it was my temperament, my mood that affected the climate of the classroom.
Hmm.
And the idea was that, educators have an obligation, a responsibility, a relationship to the culture of their classroom. And so, how you approach each day and what kind of space you create is how your classroom is going to go.
Mhm.
And it's the frightening conclusion because sometimes your classroom isn't going well and you have to wonder, what is it about what you're bringing into that space or not bringing in that might be contributing to that. So it's something that I learned actually quite early on in education, but it was not in the classroom. So I started my working with kids in a professional way beyond babysitting at summer camps.
Hmm.
And they were always residential summer camps. And the first director I worked under, who I then ended up working for a decade in another job, but his name is Rick Harris, and he always said to us, when the campers arrive, make sure you stop what you're doing and look at them and welcome them. And, in the rush of that first day, it's really tempting to just sort of say, put your stuff over there and bark a bunch of directions. But just acknowledge them that they're coming into your cabin and that you're glad that they're with you. And then take a moment and just make sure they know where their basic needs will get met. Show them where their bed is, show them where the bathroom is, show them where the cafeteria is. And it may have seemed, a little procedural or basic, but what he knew is, the whole Maslow's needs, that the hierarchy that we need to pay attention to in working with kids, which is that if they don't have some of those basic needs attended to, they can't get up into the higher order of thinking, and of relationship building and of learning new things and of taking risks and of feeling like they're in a safe space, which is needed first before you can push them, push for growth.
Right. I love that safe space. That's really important. Yeah.
Yeah. So, when I started teaching, it was the same. I approached it in the same way. When kids arrive, I always greet them at the door by name. The first day is a little longer, right? Because I have a list in front of me and I have to make sure I say their names correctly. But even every day after that till tomorrow, the last day of school, I will greet them by name at the door with eye contact, with that same intention of making sure that each and every day they feel welcome. And then, I want to share with you this thing that my principal introduced to our school this year, and I'm pretty sure it comes out of an initiative during the pandemic, which was to monitor students' social emotional levels during the pandemic, their response to this situation. And we were asked to have some kind of a daily check-in. I think it might have even been mandatory. I'm not exactly sure. But at my school, excuse me, one option was to give the kids a calendar with the days of the days of the month on it, a monthly calendar.
Right.
And each day they would then put their face on the calendar or a drawing of their choice to indicate how they were feeling that day when they arrived at school. And I remember when she told me that we were going to be doing it, I just thought, this is kind of a waste of time. My kids are older. I don't want them just, what are they going to do? Scribble on this calendar. Is it going to be meaningful? How am I going to make this meaningful? How is this going to add to the beginning of our day? But I have to say, I actually love it.
What did you love about it? What did you love about it?
I love the window into their brain. Like they share. I mean, first of all, they absolutely want me to see it. So I make it the condition of them hanging up their coat. So when they come into my room, and this was also because of COVID, I would make them go to their seats, which were spaced out, instead of in other years where they might have gone all to the closet. But I didn't want the congestion in the closet, to space. So I would have them all go to their desks, which were spaced out, and then only a few at a time would be allowed to go up and put their stuff away. So I would do that based on my walking to their desk and looking at their calendar. And so they came right in and they would be so anxious to fill it out. And, some of them were quite keen to tell me why their face was what it was. Some of them, I would notice it when I said good morning as they walked in. So this is just another safety net, right? Another way to sort of catch kids who might be in a bad space or in a happy space, or somewhere in between. So, yeah, I mean, it's such a nice little, it gives me information, right, about the kid and about how their day is going that I can then use to help make the day continue to go well or to go better than it has already.
Right.
I like knowing who to handle fragile with care.
Right. Hoping that we have a post-pandemic time, right? That's what we're hoping
for sure.
Would you continue using something like this?
Totally. Yes. That's sort of why I'm bringing it up, is because I sort of dismissed it as like, this is hokey, this is gimmicky, this isn't going to be giving me useful information. This is just to check off that we've done some kind of a daily check. But I actually adore it. And I'm sure some of it is me trying to make sure that it is being used well. And then the kids then realizing that I'm taking it seriously. So then they take it seriously. Right. So I'm not sure it's used to the same authentically or as helpfully for other teachers, but I find it super helpful and very authentic.
I can see this being used in kindergarten.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I mean, I think it was used pre-K to fifth. And I thought it might, in the younger grades, it made more sense to me. I thought it wasn't going to translate well to the older grades, but it absolutely did.
Right.
And, there was one time where this kid had to go to the bathroom so bad. And, I wasn't or no, sorry, had to go to the counselor. He had a counseling session so bad, and or didn't want to be late for the whatever they were going to be doing that day, but I hadn't gotten over to his desk, and I'm like, it's okay, just put away your calendar, get your stuff put away, and you can go. And like the look on his face, looking down at his calendar and look at like, you're not going to come look at it. Made me, and that was like, I don't know, second week of school, third week of school, whatever it was. And it made me realize that it wasn't okay to not skip, to skip looking at their calendar even once for some of them, because
right.
they really wanted me to do that,
Right. My son-in-law, who teaches fifth grade, he's often said to me that, teachers often forget that fifth graders are still young children, and expect so much of them, but they're just children. They're just children that we're working with. So I think that this speaks to what he's saying also. Yeah.
Yeah.
So beyond that, before that, what happens in your classroom?
Yeah. So before that, and still now, after they put their stuff away, I always start the day with a community meeting. And that sometimes involved kids sharing how they were feeling, but it's evolved more now to because just in the interest of time, I find it more useful to call it "What's in your news." And so I'll say, "What's in your news today?" I'll say the date. Today's June 26th, 7th, whatever it is, 2022. What's in your news? And the kids are then invited to share one at a time anything they want to share that's in their news. And it could be something personal, that it was their birthday, they lost a tooth, they're going to have a new brother or sister, they found out their cousin has cancer, they saw a fire truck on the way to school today. Or it could be something they've heard in the news, the actual news of the school, of the city, of their neighborhood, of the world, that they want to share with the class, that they wonder about, that they've heard grownups talking about, that they have a thought about. It's up to them to decide what to bring up.
And do the other children who are listening to this, do they comment on this, or is it just a statement made? How do you handle it?
No, they comment. And so, okay, so there's so many levels to this. It's hard to know where to start, but on the first, it says to kids, what's important to you is important to me.
Mhm.
So I'm inviting them to share with me things that are important in their life, and going along with that hierarchy of needs, it's saying like, okay, let's unpack some of what's taking up your brain right now, some of what you're worried about, wondering about, can't stop thinking about, to hopefully make space for whatever we're going to learn today. But also to say that you're not alone, that, we support you, we celebrate with you, we're worried with you, whatever's appropriate. So in doing that and sharing our thoughts and feelings, it teaches empathy, it teaches caring and having care and concern about something that maybe doesn't even affect you directly. That whole windows into other people's world, teaches you about cultures sometimes, but it's also can be really like a mirror. It can be really validating. Oh, someone else has this situation that's like my situation. And it can be community building, and really, people can feel relieved that they're not the only one going through something like that.
Right.
And, frankly, for many, many kids, it's the first time, and maybe the only time that they raise their hand in class. I mean, you get those kids who never want to participate during a lesson, but we'll talk during what's in your news. And you see, as the year goes on, that confidence building with the what's in your news, and then that translating to being able to share and comment during the lessons. So it's also just practice, like on being a student in a classroom and having a discussion.
Right. Have you ever gotten into a dark place that was difficult to get out of during this what's in your news time?
Yeah, I mean, the quick answer is no, but I think that's because of the way I approach it. I mean, I try not to be, first of all, I don't pretend to have any answers or solutions.
Okay.
I never feel like I have to come up with like, now here's what you have to do. That's never the goal. The goal is just to listen, be present, make people feel heard and understood and seen and, validated. So in that way, it never gets too dark because we don't end up in this like, saving place of feeling like, if we don't come up with the answer right here and right now, then all is lost, because we never pretend that that's ever the agenda. And then the other thing is, if they start getting to a dark place and feeling like if I feel like with what they're sharing that it's getting to be too graphic, or the details are getting to be too much, perhaps triggering for other students, I'll stop them and rephrase what they're saying. Like, that sounds really scary. It sounds like that was really hard. That sounds like it was terrifying. And try to redirect the conversation to the experience as a whole and not get mired down in the details.
Right. Can you give an example of that, Doug?
Sure. We had one student whose parent was going through a lot with substance abuse once. And sometimes the student would share what the weekend was like. And it was, it was a lot of information about how awful it was to see her parent in the throes of abuse and substance abuse. And instead of letting the child, talk about all the details, which would get, sometimes kids laugh or think it's funny when you say somebody's drunk or whatever, but for other kids that can feel like, scary and similar to maybe something they're experiencing. I'll just stop the conversation. Like I'll stop the child and I'll say, wait a minute. So this happened and you saw it? And she'll say, yes. And I said, that must've been really scary. And then, oh no, well, it happens all the time. And then I'll say something like, I'm sure at times there are moments where you wish it wasn't happening. Is that right? Am I true when I think that way? And then I'll usually get a nod and I'll say, yeah. So what I'm thinking is, school can be one of those places. So sometimes what I will try to do is show some areas where they have support.
That's a good point.
So I try to give them some resources. It's not so much solutions to the problem as much as it is for them to realize that, that they're not alone. And if a kid's constantly saying to me, no, I like it, I like to see that, or something like that, I'll say, well, some people in similar situations get tired of seeing it after a while. And if that ever ends up being you, here are some things we have at our school. And, and a lot of times kids will jump in at different times and say some of this language as the year goes on. Because they'll hear me saying it initially, perhaps, and then they'll start picking up on how to respond to somebody who's experiencing a hard situation.
Right. So you're really modeling for them how they can respond. Very positive.
Yeah.
Yeah. So okay. So we very recently had this horrible massacre in Uvalde. Did your children come in talking about it? I know some parents don't let the children see the news. Some parents do.
Yeah.
From each other, whatever.
So first they came in, what was it, a week before? And in the news was the supermarket shooting in Buffalo, New York. So, first of all, I don't share what's in the news ever, me personally, unless it's something that relates to something we've already talked about. in class or something we're reading about, or,
Right.
that I think they would find interesting. But news like that's traumatic, I don't bring up. I wait and see if the kids do. But what's really nice about having this system in place, this what's in your news system, is it means that when things come up, like what happened in Uvalde, or what happened in Buffalo, or when Black Lives Matter, when George Floyd was murdered, or any of those times when something sort of major happens,
Mm.
kids know that just like anything else, they don't have to carry this on their own. They don't have to try to figure out the details on their own or worry about it on their own. That there's a community of people here at school who are wanting and willing to support them. And what's also nice about it is, if I didn't allow them to have those conversations in front of me, if I said, that's not something we're going to talk about at all, then it almost becomes that taboo thing that comes up at recess or at lunch. Like that when teachers say, oh, I don't let my kids talk about that, it makes me think, that it's a false notion that then they're never going to talk about it. They might not talk about it in front of you, but the chances that they'll never talk about it, especially if it's a big news story that affects their people that their age or who look like them or in their state,
Right.
they're going to hear about it and they're going to talk about it. And if you're not present or an adult is not present, who knows what that information they're getting is, if it's true, if it's not true, how biased it is. And nobody's there to help them process it.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's helped them to think it through, or think about, put a spin on it that can provide them some support or comfort, or ways to look at it that make it not so debilitating.
Right.
So, they brought up the supermarket, and we talked a little bit about, at that point, we had done some work on what oppression was, what prejudice was, what bias was, what stereotypes are. And so we kind of related it to that, and talked about how some people still have a lot of hatred for different identities, and what it was that with each other that we can do to help shift that, to help change that, in our classroom, in our schools, in our communities, how the response to that in the state, with safety laws, with the difference between a crime and a hate crime. We talked a little bit about that, to try to show them that there are systems in place to help make these kinds of things less likely, not just in a proactive way, but like creating cultures where acceptance and celebration of vulnerable groups is just part of, what we do.
Mm-hmm.
Dismantling racism, sort of that anti-racism work. And, it helps that I teach fourth grade, where we talk about colonial America, because we can look at a lot of where the racism started in our country and what anti-racists look like back then and what they can look like now. So, we kind of turned it into that, like this is part of a problem that we've already looked at. And then when it came up with Uvalde, I wasn't sure. Because, with it being in a school and with students, I thought there might be some parents who deliberately kept this information from their kids, or who wouldn't want their kids to have known about it yet. So I didn't know whether or not any kid would raise their hand, but sure enough, as soon as I said, what's in your news, the first student who raised his hand said, I heard about what happened in Texas. And so first of all, my antenna goes up with, like you mentioned before, make sure this doesn't go into a lot of gory details, that it's just going to be traumatic for kids, especially if this is new information, and try to stick to how this kid might be feeling, help this kid process it.
Okay.
So the first thing he says is, I heard about what happened in Texas, and I just wonder what might have been going through that teenager's mind, that he felt like this was sort of the best way out for whatever he was dealing with.
Wow. Future social worker. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Like your first statement is about
Mhm.
empathy for the shooter. Like that was not, I was not expecting that at all. There was not one gory detail. There wasn't even really a lot of information about what happened that he was sharing.
Right.
He was just sharing this empathy for the shooter without using the word the shooter. He just said the teenager. And then he said, the families that were the victims, this must be so hard for them. And I just wonder what the government can do
Mhm.
to help in situations like this to make it less likely that these things continue to happen. And so that was a really nice out for me because I could say, okay, so you heard about a situation in Texas. For those who don't know, it involved a shooting at a school, and you're looking at like what role can governments play to help prevent this kind of thing from happening. And he's like, yeah. And then also some trying to understand what leads people to this, and maybe we can help people before they do something like this. And he was
Right.
like, ah. And then I went right on to the next kid. Like I didn't feel the need to
Right.
explain any more of the situation.
Right.
And then the next kid was like, I just don't understand why this keeps happening. This isn't the first time in our country. I just feel like we should have solved this by now. And so that was really nice because I could then say, well, that sounds a lot like what, so-and-so said, that you're looking for solutions.
Right.
And then the third person was like, and in a school, like a place that's supposed to be safe,
Right.
you would think this kind of thing wouldn't happen. And that was really nice because then I could say, well, who can tell me what kinds of things we do at our school to make sure this doesn't happen?
Right.
And again, back to that, like reassuring kids that we're looking out for them, that we've got their basic needs
Right. Right. And
met,
also spinning it to being proactive.
to be proactive. And we never once discussed, any of the specific, nor would I have, but I'm saying the kids didn't even bring that in.
Right.
So it was a really nice way for me to just, and then I do think it's important to say that sometimes kids will come at these stories. This didn't happen this year, but sometimes they will come at these stories from a particular agenda that they've heard at home or based on the way they got the information, wherever they got it. And so I will sometimes say, is there another way to look at that? Or does anyone have another thought about that? And it's also these in the news times can be a time to discuss what it means to have multiple opinions about things.
Right.
And that sometimes, is true. You can have a situation that happens and it's can be looked at from this perspective by some people and looked at from that perspective by other people. And sometimes we can use an equity lens to see which one is going to lead us to equity. And sometimes both opinions are possible at the same time. And then you have to let the kids understand that there's other ways to look at it, and we have to be respectful of all of that.
Right.
So in this particular case, we didn't really have to get into that much. We just talked about the systems that we have in place in our school and our city and our state, the laws that are passed, and the like you mentioned at the beginning, some of the drills that we do,
Right.
so that we're prepared.
Right.
And the
Right.
kids know that, like, I've thought of this and
Right.
it's okay. And we can do math,
Right.
but
Right.
this is, they don't
Yeah.
have to sit there in their seat. Like, is this going to happen to me?
Right.
Because
Have you
we've
gotten
talked about it.
feedback from families about in the news?
Yeah. So, that particular day, the Uvalde day, I looked at my phone a bit later, I plug it in when I'm teaching. And, there was a note from one of the parents saying, I don't want my kid to hear about this.
Mm.
Which, I mean, this was later in the year, right? So I sort of felt like, you've known me now for a while. I hope you trust that I'll handle this well. But I wrote back and I reassured the parent that their child was actually the second child to volunteer, but that we hadn't talked about any details, and that we wouldn't, and that the focus had been on how to help people who are dealing with a lot of emotions, in this case, the shooter, although we never identified him as such, how to put systems in place to make sure these kinds of things never happen, and what, drills for when they do. And the parent was fine with that.
Right.
Sometimes I have had feedback from folks that their child has felt like their point of view didn't get enough validity from me, or that they didn't feel like they could share an opposing view. But you know what? Every single time I've gotten that feedback, it's been on an issue where the view of the family, and I know what I'm about to say is controversial, but the view of the family will not lead to equity. So remember when I was talking about it's okay to entertain lots of different positions on something, and that sometimes we can use an equity lens. So like if we're talking about gender roles, for example, and somebody wants to say that, in their culture or in their family or in their belief system, women should never work, should never have the opportunity to work outside the home. We can entertain that as a way to think about genders. We can, by entertain that, I mean, we can acknowledge that that's a way to think about genders, but I'm not going to leave the conversation with that's just as okay as thinking that women should have the right to work out the home.
So what would you say in that situation?
So I would say the problem with saying that no women can work out of the home, or that's the only way for women to be, is that it prevents other women who want to work outside the home from being able to do that. Mm-hmm. And if we want to live in a place of equity where people have equitable opportunities and choices, and we're able to benefit from their gifts and and celebrate their accomplishments, then we need to be able to, they need to be able to reach the same levels of in their careers as anyone else, regardless of gender. And so the problem with holding the opinion of women can't work outside the home as we can hold it as equal to an opinion that where women can't, but it's not going to lead to equity between the genders.
Right.
So I have to explain that to kids. And then I'm careful to say, and so sometimes people will accept that because it's part of their culture and they love their culture. And within that culture, that feels okay. And some people don't accept that within that culture and will leave that, or will leave that part of their culture behind and keep everything else. I mean, there's all kinds of options for folks,
right.
And sometimes we've talked about that with the different sects of Judaism in Brooklyn, how there's lots of ways to be Jewish, right? We see that all the time in Brooklyn.
Right.
And so, people have to decide like what fits their belief system. Mm-hmm. And for some folks, it's very comfortable to be Hasidic or to be Orthodox or to be, part of a Jewish community. And for other people, that's that they want a different experience of Judaism. Right. So, and all of those live here, and all of those people are Jewish, but they found a way to do that fits with their,
right.
Their soul, their own
right.
idea about how things can, should be.
Right. I think the children in your class are very lucky. I think the families are very lucky. I'd like to clone you. But now I'm curious in your role as a father, right? So your own child is also in the fourth grade, just finishing fourth grade. How do you handle this at home as a parent?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of went at it the same way in terms of, well, if I don't have this conversation with her, then some kid on the playground is, and who knows what that kid is going to tell her, and I want somebody there with her who can help her manage this information or figure out what to do with it.
Right.
So, my husband and I sat her down and said, is there something we want to talk with you about? And it's not like we never do that. So it wasn't completely out of the blue. We'll say to her, hey, we have to talk to you about something, and it can be big or small, whatever, right. As a regular part of our day. So it wasn't like, she wasn't like, oh my gosh, am I in trouble? Or this must be really bad. But she could tell by our tone that it was serious.
Right.
And so I said, hey, there's something that happened in another part of the United States. And I showed her where on the map, as I did my students, so she could see it wasn't so close, even what happened in Buffalo. So it wasn't so close to where we live. And with her, I gave her some more of the details because I wanted her to know the facts versus, any false information that somebody might tell her.
Right.
But I didn't show her a single picture. I talked about, the Mr. Rogers approach of like, who were the helpers, or, how the teachers responded, and some of the things that I know her school has in place to respond in these kind of situations. And that this was something that as a country, that we saw as a really serious thing that needs to be solved. And now people are trying to figure that out. And, we just want you to know about it because we're concerned about it too. And we want you to know that, your school is doing what it can. Everybody's on the same page as to trying to keep you safe.
Right.
And how important it is to take those drills seriously, and that it's just practice, but it is something you need to do well in case it ever is real, unfortunately.
Right. What a time for children.
And then we tried to move on, and then if she brought it up again, same thing with my class, if they brought it up again, fine, but they didn't. So
Right.
I'm not going to keep revisiting it.
Right. It's that whole thing about sometimes a child will ask a question and the adult will give a very long, complicated answer. And all they wanted was one simple response. And I guess it's something we have to think about,
Yeah.
Information.
Definitely. I mean, yeah, I try as much as I can. I try to repeat what they said, but frame it, like I said, away from the details and more about that sounds
right
like you felt, or that sounds, to get
Right.
back at that, the empathy and the sympathy and the.
Right. Well, Doug, is there anything that we didn't talk about that you want to bring up, and that we gave a lot of information?
I mean, I'll just say that, this is a move I make, right? We talk about teacher moves, to help kids understand that they're not alone with these issues, and that their teacher is part of their support group, right? But it's a move that other people don't make. And by not making that move, you're making a move, right? You're telling kids they are alone, or that you at school are not available to help them with these things. And to say like, well, that they can talk to me in private. I mean, if you don't have a mechanism in your room for them to do that, the calendar, the saying good morning, the I want to know how you're doing or what's going on in your day, I think it's unrealistic to think that at least the anybody but the most outgoing would ever do that.
Right.
I mean, maybe some kids who are really good with social emotional intelligence, but for the ones for whom that's a struggle, which is, frankly, most students these days are somewhere, making those muscles stronger. They need these systems in place.
Right.
And so to not do that sends a pretty strong message to the kids.
Right.
That you're not willing to listen, that you don't want to hear about this kind of stuff. And I do think it runs counter to a message that they're constantly told, which is, if you have a problem, find an adult, go tell an adult. And if we as adults don't want to hear it when they do, or say, we're not going to talk about that,
Right.
That's a pretty strong message you're sending.
Right.
So it's worth noting that, yes, I am sending a message, but so are you if you don't do this.
Right. Doug, I think this was incredibly thought-provoking. I hope people will respond on the blog as to what they've been doing or what their questions are. I can even pass things on to you if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
And I want to thank you very much for sharing all of this.
Anytime.
Thank you.